Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you could just take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. I will start with myself. I am Nina Sachdev. I'm the Communications Director for Media Impact Funders. And my Miami Vice Blazer and I would like to welcome you to our program today, which is a sneak preview of the Night Media Forum happening next week from March 2nd through the 4th. Night Media Forum is a gathering for foundation leaders and media makers to talk about issues and opportunities in local news. I just want to take one moment and acknowledge that yesterday we did pass a very grim milestone. We've lost 500,000 people to COVID in the last year. And if anyone on this call has lost a loved one or a friend, on behalf of my team and I, we do give our hearts and deepest sympathies to you and your family. And the reason I'm providing this context is because it does provide some of the backdrop for today's discussion. Next week's Night Media Forum will examine polarization and what philanthropy and the journalists that they support can do to address it. And just yesterday, Dr. Fauci said that our country's extreme polarization has contributed to the death toll in our country. And so these issues are very serious. So thank you tonight for keeping the spotlight intensely focused on these forces and others that are undermining our democracy. If for whatever reason you can't make it to KMF next week, we're giving you the inside scoop right here, right now. And we have a fantastic moderator who's going to guide you through the next 50 minutes or so. And that is Karen Rundlett, Director of Journalism at Knight Foundation. If at any point you want to chime in or ask a question, drop us a line in the chat, raise your hand, do a little dance, let us know. We want to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to Karen, who will introduce our fantastic speakers for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Thanks again for the opportunity, really. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I know that Zoom programming is competitive. There are lots of offerings out there. I appreciate your taking the time. Yes, Night Media Forum is coming up next week, March 2nd through the 4th. We have at least 2,600 registrants and counting. That's really 4 times the number of people we're usually able to host in person in Miami. And this is really a chance for Knight Foundation to share why investing in informed communities is so vital. Now, we say the words at Knight Foundation, informed communities, all the time. So what does that really even mean? When I say that, it doesn't always translate for people, but when I ask people, what about misinformed or uninformed communities, they get it immediately. The nation, the world, has certainly recognized the need for trusted, accurate information during this pandemic. And we've all seen how misinformation can damage our elections process and US democracy. So during this year's Night Media Forum, we're going to explore a number of topics: science reporting, racial equity, community media, the power of the social media platforms, and polarization in our country. Those are just some of the topics. Today, we're hearing from 2 amazing panelists. Susan Leith is the relatively new Chief Operating Officer of Report for America, that's a Knight grantee. And Mitra Kalita is a former CNN News executive and now the co-founder of URL Media. The question for both of these journalism leaders: what role does your organization play in uniting these divided states of America? We're going to have a few presentations, and as always, please bring your questions. Let's begin with Susan.
Susan, you're on mute.
Susan Leith from Report for America, the Chief Operating Officer.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Karen and Knight Foundation, for the opportunity to join you today for a conversation about Report for America, an initiative of the Ground Truth Project. I'm Susan Leith, And, you know, this mission for me is a passion. I've spent 30 years of working in media, most recently as a regional president with USA Today Network. And then after that, I joined UNC on the US News Desert research, which is funded by Knight Foundation. It's research that really talks about communities that no longer have newspapers. So the crisis in journalism has contributed to the rise in misinformation and polarization, just as Karen has talked about. When local news is lost, we consume more partisan and more national media. Residents view each other as political stereotypes rather than neighbors with common interests. Studies have shown that we're more likely to vote straight ticket, and voting rights go down without a strong local presence. News deserts are spreading. We see a dramatic drop in the number of local news reporters. I mean, from a peak of 158,000 in 1990s to where we're at right now, 180,000, and that number is just diminishing. So what's at risk? Polarization, our democracy. In the absence of local reporting, the country grows divided. Truth evaporates in news deserts. The results: no one is watching the story, a decline in civic engagement, a drop in voting, a rise in injustice, and an indifference to lies. The solution: America, a dramatic new approach to restoring trust in journalism, grounded in public service, focused on local community. Our goal is 1,000 reporters on the ground by 2024. How does it work? Innovative news organizations, outstanding young journalists, reporters on the ground. Because we partner with hundreds of news organizations, Report for America can scale rapidly. From 2017, we've already grown from 2017 to our 2020 numbers to 226 reporters. And again, our goal by 2024 is 1,000 reporters. We have what you call an innovative 3 matching model approach. We support 50% with the help of Knight Foundation of our reporters, and then 20% of the funds come from the local community that we also partner with our local sustainability team to help. We partner with our local sustainability team to help our local newsrooms learn how to, what we call, fish for themselves and build funding support themselves. As well as we have our local newsrooms have 25% to make sure they have skin in the game as well. Community support matches our national donor investment in core members on a 1-to-1, which I was sharing earlier in terms of our local sustainability team. Last year, our local sustainability team raised $4.6 million from with our local newsrooms, and that's 8,500 local donors energized to give. Increasing impact. Report for America, our reporters, on average, 3 to 5 years of professional experience. They're rooted in a community, so for us, that's really critical. 42% are people of color, and more than 60% are women, and the minimum age is 26. Our host newsrooms, they have a mix of newspapers, public radio, TV stations, and digital startups. We believe in looking at rural and urban communities across 48 states and Puerto Rico, and news deserts serving a mix of undercover communities and unreported issues. If you look at our class again, you know, this year's class is going to position us where we're going to have 200 Report for America host newsrooms. That's 305 Report for America core members, so we're very excited about that. Here are some core stories. I'll walk you through these quickly. You can we can talk about this in the chat. But I wanted to share, you know, we have a reporter here from Monique Jones. She did a story on gentrification where there was a green space playground in a low-income area that was being eliminated. And within 2 weeks of her story, that green space playground was put back in the community. We also have a core member making an impact, Will Wright from Kentucky. He did a story around human rights. This is a story, there wasn't clean water in the community. And within months, Will was able to gain national media attention, to include Aaron Brockovich, amongst others, compelling the district commissioner to hire early and the governor to fine $5 million for repairs. And then we have a story from Obed Manuel out of Texas, where he reported about a citizen who was detained for Border Patrol for 3 weeks without cause. And within, his story went viral, and by the end of the day, Garcia was released from ICE custody. And so again, just demonstrating impact. What's new this year? Well, we're very excited that we're top 6 finalists, the 100 and change. And I'll stop for now for your questions.
Thank you, Susan. I'm just gonna check the chat to see if anyone has any questions. I do want to ask you about that last mention that you made. A Report for America is one of 6 finalists for MacArthur Foundation's $100 million grant. That's really, quite an honor. How will Report for America change if you're awarded this kind of funding?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. We are honored and privileged to be considered one of the top 6 finalists for the 100 and change. And what would happen if we were so fortunate to be able to receive the $100 million? It would speed up our process. We've scaled out that if we were to receive the $100 million over the course of 6 years, that would be 750 host newsrooms, and we would have a cumulative of 2,500 core members dispersed in our local communities, really taking a real big bite out of news deserts. So it would speed up the process for us. And so we're very excited about potentially having that opportunity for the 100 and change.
Just another question. Why don't you just define a news desert for anyone who's listening who's not clear on what that is?
So a news desert is a community that no longer has a newspaper. You have a ghost, we also call ghost deserts, if you will, and those are markets that have one newspaper, but news deserts are the one that no longer has a community newspaper.
And how is the reporting from these core members strengthen these news deserts? You gave one example, but would you point to another one?
Well, I would say that our core members have been able to create impact in the local community. And as I shared, we've been able to, as a result of the reporting, change policies and procedures, been able to change lives as a result of the impact of our reporting, and combat misinformation and disinformation by having local reporters on the ground telling stories about impact in their communities. It's critical and even when you think about polarization, we've been able to, by having local reporters on the ground, that really helps when you talk about polarization as well.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and then I do want to turn to Mitra. One of the questions is from Gail McCullough. I hope I pronounced that correctly. How will Report for America sustain the reporters after you place them? You explained that it's a multi-year opportunity, but she wants to know more detail about how the cost is taken over after the first year.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. So the first year, we provide 50% of the support. The third year, we provide 33% of the support. And then the second year is 33% of the support. And then the third year is 20% of the support. But the local sustainability model is really critical for us in terms of helping news organizations be able to look strategically and diversify their pipeline through funding opportunities. Is really critical for us, for newsrooms, to help themselves for sustainability as well. And so that's why we have our local sustainability team working directly with our host newsrooms, helping them around things around funding acumen, crowdfunding opportunities, as well as fiscal sponsorship opportunities as well, working with community foundations for 6-figure funding opportunities, as well as multi-year funding opportunities. So for us, it's really critical that we're working with the host newsrooms so that they can be able to have some to support themselves for sustainability as well. And as I shared, that number, the $4.6 million, exceeded our expectations. Our goal was $2 million. So we're really excited about our partnerships with the local newsrooms.
So long-term, Report for America is really expecting philanthropy to step up to support news and journalism.
100%. We definitely feel that if you think about news organizations, sustainability through the traditional advertising legacy model, I just think that we're not going to win it. You know, so local philanthropy is going to be critical, along with some of the diversity of some of the other mixes in the pipeline, whether it's subscription models and traditional advertising models as well. But we strongly feel that philanthropy is critical as we're looking to, bottom line, minimize news deserts, minimize polarization, and protect democracy.
And just finally, one quick question. Is this only for newspaper reporters? Is this for other media?
We have a mix of newspapers, digital startups, stations, and public radio stations as well. So no, it's a mix of multiple different media organizations as a part of our business strategy.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Now to URL Media, which is focused on news outlets that serve Black and Brown communities. Mitra Kalita, if you would join us and tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Karen. It's lovely to be here. And I do want to give Susan a shout out, but also I'm so honored to be here with her because I was an inaugural judge for Report for America back, gosh, a few years ago. I was still at CNN. And I remember reading an essay from a dental hygienist in the middle of the country who wanted to be a journalist and thinking, if this works, what a revolution it could be because it will redefine our industry. And so it's just really wonderful to see the trajectory a few years later. Susan began with a sense of mission, and I think that's a good place to begin, right? Just by virtue of all of us being with Knight today. We definitely come to our work with a sense of purpose. And if there's been any year where we really need to lean into that and have that guide the rest of this uncertain path, I think now is it. And so I really appreciated Nina's kind of pause there to just recognize how we're all coming to this gathering. So my path, I've been in mainstream media for more than 20 years. I've worked everywhere. So, you can Google that to fact check me, but I was at CNN for the last 5 years. I've been at the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, the Washington Post, on and on. And as the child of immigrants, you can imagine that those brand names are a parent's dream come true, right? And so in this very difficult year, I decided to give my parents a lot of agitation by launching my own company. And so URL Media was born out of, you could say out of the last year, or you could say out of the last 20 years or the last 400 years. My co-founder, Sarah Lomax-Reese, is the president of WURD. Some of you might know them. They are a Knight grantee, but they are a Black talk radio station in Philadelphia. About 6 months ago, I launched a newsletter called Epicenter, which serves literally the epicenter of the epicenter. I live in Jackson Heights, Queens. In the spring, as the pandemic and lockdown began, the sound of ambulances and like the feeling of panic was very palpable in the air here. And I launched this newsletter because it felt like nobody was quite bluntly looking out for my neighborhood. And I do want to begin with the micro, especially as Susan talked about news deserts. Just because you are in the most major media market, i.e. New York City in the world, does not mean that you don't suffer from the same neglect and systems that ignore coverage of essential workers and what their needs are right now. And so Sarah and I, who've known each other for a few years, kind of were in these parallel journeys in the beginning of the pandemic. George Floyd happened, and we were talking on a Friday night, and I remember this moment, I'm kind of trying to take you into that, where we came up with the idea for URL in like a 5-minute phone conversation. Since then, there have been hours and hours and hours, but we were really born of this idea that could we create a media entity that would uplift, respect, and love its users as a part of its mission. And while the URL kind of construction is catchy, I'm very sincere in saying we thought that the idea of loving our audiences was a revolution, because at the time, if you kind of look back to the spring that we came out of into George Floyd, there was this notion of objective journalism and you know, what's fair and accurate and what's our obligation to users. And much of that language is very distant. And I thought, for the sake of my children, for the sake of Sarah's children, for the sake of the countless children who look like ours, not just around the country, but around the world, which by the way is the majority of the world, to approach media and coverage from a place of wanting to uplift and love your audiences felt like the revolution we needed. And so about 6 weeks ago, we soft launched, actually about a month ago, I should be more generous in giving myself a break. We soft launched URL Media with 8 partners. We together are the Haitian Times, Scrollstack, which is a South Asian platform, Epicenter, the newsletter I just mentioned to you, which has had a really interesting trajectory, which I'll come back around to, WURD, Scalawag, which is a social justice magazine that covers the South, TBN24, which is a Bangladeshi live streaming channel that has 2.3 million users on Facebook. That's bigger than Newsweek and the Chicago Tribune combined, but my guess is most people haven't heard about it. Documented, I believe they're also a Knight grantee, but they serve the immigrant population in New York City, mostly through English and Spanish, but are about to launch in other languages. And they communicate through WhatsApp, very service-oriented journalism. And finally, Palabra, a freelance network launched by the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. We envision this network growing exponentially. And at our model very quickly, besides the kind of tenet of uplift, respecting, and loving our users, we apply that to our advertisers. So we still are gung-ho on the advertising model. I think it's important to note that in communities like ours, small businesses are not just advertisers, they are gathering spots of our community. They represent lifelines in services for Black and Brown communities. And so we believe there's definitely a market in uplifting that. Syndication. This is really an area of the media that, after decades of consternation, at least in my own career, we believe we can be a one-stop solution to diversifying the content that you're reading in your outlets, that you're hearing on television, and just instantly offers the ability to be intimate and authentic by partnering with folks like us. My shorthand of that is, if you wanted a food tour of Queens, you definitely want to be with me versus a major food magazine, just because I'm living it every day, especially in the pandemic. Takeout has saved my life. And so I think that that our model really leverages the best of what is resonating on the internet with what our community journalism approach offers. I do not see digital disruption and diversity as separate strategies. These go hand in hand. And so there's a reason that our outlets are not just diverse in terms of geography and the audiences they represent, but their platforms, right? I would venture that Documented could give any mainstream media outlet a WhatsApp strategy that would give them a run for their money. They are excellent at engaging with users on their terms, on their platforms, and in the spaces that they're most comfortable. And speaking of, I'll bring this back around, Karen, and I'd love to hear your questions and those of of the folks gathered here. You know, the last few weeks, Epicenter, the newsletter that I represent in this consortium, started helping folks navigate getting their vaccines. And it started really kind of quietly, right? There was a woman who used to work with my father, and she reached out to us, and I said, okay. And then she goes to a Black church here in East Elmhurst that unveiled about 16 other churchgoers who reached out and said, could you help us get our vaccines too? Because Doris said it was actually really easy. And as of today, we've helped register more than 150 users. We did write about this, but producing content was not the intention when we started interacting with everyone. And I share that because I think that all of us are having to rethink our relationships with our users. I don't just say this of journalists, I say this as, you know, the pandemic has profoundly changed what businesses mean to people. It's profoundly changed our own relationships with the 20-block radius around us. And at the same time, there's a level of intimacy that people are seeking. And so the emails that I get from restaurant workers and taxi drivers and trying to navigate the system, which is exactly how we were founded, right? Our early days as this newsletter. I think are a remarkable case study in what we mean by engagement, right? It's not just about comments on Facebook. It's not just about sort of asking users what they think and hoping that they respond to us. It's actually proactively identifying needs in a community and being able to respond to them. And so this vaccine example, I just think of as a useful note of where people are right now and the ability of media organizations to meet them. Sorry, I just yelled at my daughter who came in with like a cartoon or something on her laptop. Sorry about that. Karen, I think we can wind down there, and if you wanna have at me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks. So look, you talked about syndication, you talked about advertising, you talked about being as needed. So there is a comment in the chat, and it comes a little bit from the conversation before about media central to democracy, but philanthropy cannot take on all the roles needed to sustain communication and media. There are other areas that business and government have to. So I'd like you to talk more about the business model, please.
That's great. So I do want to give a shout out on the philanthropy front, which actually relates very nicely with this question. URL's soft launch was entirely possible thanks to a grant from the International Women's Media Foundation, which is, I believe, also a Knight grantee. And I mention that because neither Sarah nor I were fortunate enough to marry Apple employee number 2, or we don't come from independent wealth. I definitely had a nice cable salary over the last few years, which has allowed me to take this leap, but it's a pretty short-term leap. And I think we need to be upfront about this question, which is there's philanthropy and its role in sustaining a business like this, which we actually are very multi-pronged in our revenue model, which I'm happy to dive into further. But I also think there's an important role that philanthropy can play in launching businesses like ours right now, because what we've seen, and George Floyd, I think, really did spawn the necessity of this type of business, which centers Black voices, right? Where we serve Black and Brown communities, but we're very upfront about centering Black voices. We are not a nonprofit, and I think that's an important piece of our identity in terms of establishing the market that we represent, not just in the United States, but globally. So philanthropy plays a role, at least I can speak in my case, for Epicenter. We also benefited from a Ford Foundation grant that said, you're doing exactly the type of pandemic work that we want to be supporting. And it has enabled us to have the conversations with advertisers and to expand our definition of advertisers. You know, I come out of mainstream media where like the model is programmatic advertising and, you know, God forbid, like 1 million toenail fungus ads on a website. And like, this is why I say you can't divorce the digital from the diversity. I kind of don't want to out the advertisers we're talking to right now because we have some RFPs out, but let me try to frame it this way. What's been wonderful over the last few weeks to see is the pent-up demand for precisely the audiences we represent, right? So there are schools coming to us and saying, we need exactly this type of applicant. Can you help us get them, right? There are healthcare companies saying, the Haitian Times, like Haitian nurses and home health aides is exactly who we're trying to target, right? And so I do, while there's definitely been the limitations of the traditional advertising model that Susan spoke about and the need for philanthropy to pick that up, you also cannot discount the systemic racism that has allowed a certain advertiser to be tethered to journalism's future versus what we're trying to rethink, which is a much more inclusive approach. And then the last thing I'll mention is just syndication, which, you know, all of us in, not just in journalism, but I would say across industries are looking for, you know, what's recurring revenue strategy? How can we be direct to consumer? Are there B2B approaches? And I feel like this one solves the many, not just the best of both worlds, but of many worlds, where mainstream newsrooms definitely have a diversity problem. And I think they're understanding that they need to play the long game to solve for it. But in the meantime, could we diversify their content as they're going through that journey?
Thanks. So, you know, it's going to be on, you know, it's going to be the question that you're asked repeatedly in every single way. You know, what does success look like for you?
Yeah.
So where are you in a couple of years, and what, you know, what will you want to say about what URL Media has contributed here?
Thank you, Karen. That's a great question. So anyone who's worked with me in a newsroom knows that, like, I am an analytics, about to say something inappropriate, but I am very pro analytics. I have Chartbeat on my phone and Google Analytics, and so I think just reach is a big measure of success. And in so many ways, when we set out with URL Media, what's been the best thing to see is, oh my God, documented story on the Bronx Teamsters is required reading for every union in America right now, right? So to discover this work and then to frame it optimized for, you know, and again, anyone who's worked with me knows this, but this is like all it's again, not just journalism, but kind of how did we frame that story? What's the photo that went with it? Who were we trying to target? The hygiene of being successful on the internet is so damn hard, right? And we are these small outlets up against the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks of the world. And so the measure of success, just kind of very bluntly, ruthlessly, is the eyeballs that we can get on our content. This is why a partner like TBN24 that sort of was able to take live streams and grow to millions of users has a secret sauce that we're internally trying to learn from. The second, I would, you know, the revenue question, and I see more questions about philanthropy versus advertising and so forth popping up, which is, again, a conversation I welcome, is with an eye towards sustainability, right? So can we help our members of the network increase their revenues by a certain percentage? And we have some of these numbers in mind in the first year. in the second year? Can we prove our value that by being a part of us and working together, we're much stronger and therefore able to have many Davids, you know, proverbially beat Goliath, if you will?
So the comment, Mitra, that you're referring to, it's a little bit more of a comment back to you, but obviously somebody very engaged. You know, URL Media not being a nonprofit organization, Maggie is really saying philanthropy as venture capital is perfect, but I want to make sure we don't transfer everything to philanthropy because there will never be enough. Yeah. So, you know, that's an important point yes. for all of us to think about, all of the funders in the room, all of the on this call, on this Zoom. Yeah, I do want to bring Susan back into the conversation as well. But I do want to ask you, I do want to ask you too, Mitra, you know, you spent all these years at all these highly, these very important legacy, you know, big brand journalism names. There are a lot of them, Washington Post, CNN. What kinds of lessons are you taking from there to apply to these, to the work you're going to do?
That's a great question. So some of it is just the amplification that a mainstream outlet represents is unparalleled, right? And I think there's a lot of, certainly there's a lot of focus on newspapers as the products we need to quote unquote save. Having worked at CNN, my gosh, like the ability to understand how the visual, the video, and what news on television represents in people's lives and in their living rooms, for me was also revolutionary. And so I think there's just my own learnings over, you know, 20 plus years in media. I think there's also something about being well-resourced and working with these news organizations and saying, God, your stuff is so good, right? This content is so good. It deserves equal, if not outsized, seat at the table because you know what you're talking about, right? Whereas national media, we approach things from the top down. So we're always going to be late. We're always kind of like getting on the scene and the local reporter is like, oh, well, it's been 2 weeks. You finally caught up to this being a story, right? So I think there's a little bit of that tension that I was aware I was a part of the problem. And then the last thing I'll say is just on this notion of being well-resourced, right? And when you can achieve virality on the internet and you start to look at the ingredients of that, I liken it to when you're sitting at like a restaurant and you're like, oh my God, this is the best meal ever. I can't believe I'm sitting here right now. I'm so lucky. You have a decision, right? Are you going to tell other people about that or are you going to hoard that feeling for yourself? And we really at URL Media come from that first camp of let's be inclusive, let's spread the good word here. And I think that's another taste of the, you know, quote unquote good life of mainstream media over the last 20 years that I believe can be shared, replicated, best practices extrapolated with our member organizations.
Okay, Susan, I just want to invite you into the conversation. I see a little knowing smile. I didn't know if you had comments behind that smile.
No, I appreciate that. I just heard too that you guys didn't see my PowerPoint presentation, so apologies for that as well. But you know, what I would like to say is, you know, when I think about you know, media sustainability, I do want to talk about another program that Knight Foundation had, which is a table stakes program. You know, and what I love about the Knight Foundation's table stakes program is what it also does is help news organizations, you know, look for, you know, how to diversify their revenue opportunities and how to think differently, if you will, around sustainability. And we have found when you're looking at our host newsrooms that have had greater success with sustainability, it has been those who have aligned, if you will, with having an understanding to change their mindset to think differently in terms of how to create sustainability. We're the traditional advertising model, again, whether you're looking at digital native media, you're looking at traditional newspaper media. I mean, what we have found is that you're going to have to diversify your revenue funds. If you're it's going to have to be a new ecosystem, funding ecosystem, if you will, for sustainability. So I think that philanthropy is still a critical piece. I mean, there's other different areas where you want to look at in terms of sustainability, but philanthropy is a critical piece. That's important to be a part of the mix. So again, like I said, the table stakes program is also something else that that I see creates real good rigor around how to think differently for sustainability with media organizations.
Susan, I actually have another question actually about Report for America and the $100 million. We asked before, what if you get it? And obviously that would mean a huge expansion. What happens if you don't? Is there a lesser funding amount that comes to you? How does it work?
No, that's a phenomenal question. So thank you for that question a lot. So we're already created the infrastructure to position us to scale. So right now for us, if we get it, it will be a wonderful thing. It will speed up the process. But we're already thinking right now in terms of other funding opportunities right now for us to position ourselves to scale. $1 million, in fact, would support 30 reporters, just to give you a sense about that. And so our trajectory that we have right now has us on track right now for 1,000 reporters by 2024. And so any additional funding opportunities will position us, again, $1 million will position us to scale again another 30 reporters. The average cost of a reporter for us is $33,000. It ranges between $30,000 and $35,000. But yeah, we are hyper focused, if you will, and already positioned for scaling. But again, the 100 and change would accelerate that growth for us.
So
thank you for that question.
I just want to clarify, we're talking about 1,000 reporters in 2024, but every year they're reporters. So it's going up. Would you just sort of explain how it goes up, like this year? Yeah.
So this year we're on track to scale to the 305 reporters out of this core right now. Next year, our target is between 450 and 500 reporters. Then we get to an 800, and then we get to the 1,000 reporter scale in terms of what we're looking at. So that's how we're positioning ourselves to scale.
Excellent. We have another question here.
But that's what our current business model. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're designing a grants program here in the UK. This comes from Jonathan Hewood, UK, to support local publishers addressing polarization in their communities. Does anyone have advice on what impact metrics we might adopt?
And where's he at? Is it in the UK?
UK. And I think also maybe this is an opportunity for you to talk about Report for the World. But also, I think impact metrics too. You talk to a number of funders, and I can address that a little bit too, but why don't you go ahead,
Well,
Susan.
we believe that Report for America, or at the Ground Truth Project, which is, Report for America is an initiative of the Ground Truth Project. We believe that the crisis in journalism is global. And so last week we launched Report for the World. We're very excited about that. Same business model that we have for Report for America, because it's very scalable. Our first two markets are going to be in India and Nigeria. We're looking for, at the end of the year, to be around 20 core members. But we definitely feel that this crisis is global. And so as a result, we have launched Report for the World. And we're very excited about it.
Mitra, would you share with us a little bit about your work as a news executive for all these different organizations? What was the conversation about polarization there?
Yeah. So it was a constant conversation, but I think we do a disservice by, the word even polarization kind of implies this two sides. And if only we could have you meet let's say, fact, then everything would be fine, right? So I think one of the problems is that the way we've set polarization up is with two sides versus many sides. And so the example, and this might relate to, might help the UK person who's asking the question, you know, I just have been immersed in this vaccine spreadsheet we have, because hundreds of people have either asked for help, but a really interesting phenomenon has occurred over the last 2 days, which is people volunteering to give help, right? And so in my world, we're a very largely intersectional newsletter, right? Like Jackson Heights is an immigrant population. While we have, you know, definitely have white readers. I don't want to overstate our demographics, but for the first time, I'm hearing from people on the Upper East Side or from kind of other communities that are trying to connect with my community, right? My guess is in the traditional definition of polarization, we would consider these people on the same side because politically, they're probably all registered as Democrats, right? I'm making a lot of assumptions here. For me, the revolution of having somebody on the Upper East Side help a restaurant worker in Brooklyn or a taxi driver in Queens with their vaccine appointment and creating a conversation between them that's going to last a few days. Like, I don't know if I can get off my shift then. Can you help me cancel it? Sort of the understanding of how the internet works in one's life and in the other's life is a revolution, right? And so now, can that be measured? Which is why I mentioned the spreadsheets. I think that there are ways that can not just be measured, but I actually increasingly see funders and advertisers demanding that like micro level of what's the interactivity that you have as a brand with your people? Who are you serving? What's the demographics within that? And then the last I'll mention, Karen, and this might be of interest, it's Jonathan who asked that question. I'm also seeing some outlets start to gauge civic participation. So it's not just that we're getting along with each other, but it's what are you doing with this information to act upon what you're learning versus what I think journalism has done for too long. This horrible thing exists, good luck to you now, right? Like we're not necessarily a part of the continuation of that dialogue. And so I think another way to measure, and I hope you feel, Karen, this is addressing the polarization bit, but I really think that's the connectivity that helps conquer divisiveness, because you're not even using the fact that we disagree as the model for what you're trying to do. You're trying to find the places that we unite.
I want to just add, to me, you know, polarization, whether it's in the UK, Nigeria, or the United States, you know, the fact that you don't have, you know, local reporters, you know, at the ground telling stories in those local communities, you know, for me, it's really critical, because what happens is that void gets, you know, replaced with misinformation, disinformation, you know, gaslighting, you know, and so therefore you have polarization, you know, and then, you know, all of a sudden people, I mean, we have a universe right now where, you know, people have different, literally alternative facts. I mean, you know, these are the facts, you know, and then these are the facts, you know, and that's because of the fact that you have seen, you know, again, this lack of local journalism at the local level, telling stories. You know, one of the things for us, a key thing, just before this call, we were talking about the importance of even making sure, as we're looking at our new cohort, that we are really blocking and tackling rural America, you know, and making sure that our cohorts are aligning with rural America. It's 19%, which represent about a 19% population. We're at 10% now. We want to get to a scale to a 19% population, because of the fact that, again, in addition to making sure that, you know, urban America and, you know, we also want to make sure that there is, you know, a pipeline in rural America for facts about what's happening, you know, so that we can combat, you know, again, polarization. And so again, I truly believe, again, this is a passion to me. I mean, you know, again, been in this business for, you know, a while. It's a passion because of the fact that I have seen what happens. We've all seen it. Again, the attack on the Capitol. All what happens, an insurrection on January 6th, all that happens, if you will, with this lack of having, you know, boots on the ground, with facts that matters in our local communities. And so I just wanted to just share that.
Thank you so much. Just in the last, I think it's since 2004, that is when we have lost newspapers in over 1,800 communities. So it's since 2004. Yes, there are still public radio stations. Yes, there are still commercial television stations. I will tell you that newspapers traditionally were the outlets that were producing local original reporting, and public radio stations and television were distributing a lot of that. So we've lost the producers, the reporters, the researchers who produce those original stories. I just wanted to add to, thank you so much everybody for coming. I just wanted to mention too that during Knight Media Forum, we're actually Knight Foundation, Google, and Democracy Fund, we produced some research that you can use to look at your local community and find out what's there, what's not there, and what might you solve for to make sure this is a healthy news ecosystem. And there's a tool, a plug and play tool. This was designed by Impact Architects, and we'll be releasing that during Knight Media Forum. So I hope you'll look out for that on social media. That's something that you can use. You can examine some of the communities that we detail everything going on there and say, this community is a lot like mine, and find out what might be the right intervention. Susan and Mitra, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this conversation, and the funders who asked questions and made really thoughtful comments. And I'm going to give it back to Nina.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Karen. We're going to end a few minutes early today. I am a big fan of the idea that we should have 5 or 10 minutes to stretch before our next call. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mitra. We're looking forward to seeing you all next week at KMF. Please let us know if you have any questions at all. And for those of you who are a part of our Journalism Funders Network, we will be having our next network call on March 15th. And the second session of our Media Impact Forum will be happening on March 17th, where we will be featuring funder initiatives and collaborations on addressing vaccine hesitancy. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, go to our website, mediaimpactfunders.org. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day.